The N14 into Olifantshoek is the longest segment of straight roadway in South Africa. 100 kilometers of laser straight single-lane highway. On the north side of the road, the Kalahari rolls away into the horizon, and anywhere on that 100-kilometer strip you could aim your camera in just about any direction and snap a postcard-perfect image, highlighting those diminutive parched trees dotting the grassy plains. To the south you'd find the same landscape, and it would stretch on just shy of infinity. The grass and trees fade into the feet of the long mountains, so distant they look more like storm clouds than any real geological feature. I had set out to Vryburg before dark, but I had at least 50 kilometers to go until Olifantshoek, and already the shadow of my bakkie would spill across the opposite lane and flickered onto the grassy shoulder. If I was lucky, I'd make it to Kuruman before I lost the light. Because of my haste when I first saw it, 3 kilometers ahead of me, my initial reaction was annoyance. I mean, whatever was going on that road, it's no doubt it's going to delay me even more. Another 2 kilometers and that indistinct blob resolved itself into a mess of cars, backed up in both directions, parked on the shoulder, with some vehicles completely off the road and into the veld. Was it an accident? Maybe? Or could it be a sobriety check? But as I got closer, I noticed it was neither. No flashing lights, no orange triangles or cones. The oddest bit was that there were no people. I mean, usually in any sort of whole roadway closing incident, everyone would get out of their vehicles, they'd gawk, they'd chat, they'd stretch, take a piss on the shoulder. But not here. Whatever this was, 50 kilometers deep in the savannah, people weren't acting like people act, if anyone was here at all. I rolled to a stop behind the last car in the jam-up and saw no one. And there must have been at least 100 cars involved. 50 or so were parked in their lanes, another 20 or maybe 30 was on the shoulder of the road, and the rest struck off of the road into the bush and scrub on the north side of the highway. Strangely, all of the vehicles that departed off of the road were facing north, as if the drivers had decided to drive straight into the heart of the Kalahari. A collection of Camrys, Polos, and Etios were abandoned within 50 meters of the tar road. I considered my next move, and then I made the worst decision of my life. I took the key out of the ignition. I got out of the bakkie. I walked down the roadway packed with cars, their doors flung open and their drivers and passengers absent. I wandered into the stopped traffic, searching for anyone still there. Most of the vehicles had been abandoned with their keys still in the ignition. The only discernible sound came from the sad chimes and warning tones, futilely attempting to inform the missing drivers that they left their headlights on and the keys in their car. The majority just had an open driver's door. A few where both the driver and passenger got out left 2 doors open, and a few of them had all of their doors open. I walked past a Datsun with an empty infant's car seat in the back, its door flung wide open. At least they took their kid with them, wherever they went. I looked to the north, past the gaggle of vehicles that made their desperate and doomed thrust into the desert. Something was out there. Something moving. I climbed onto a small hill about 500 meters out, shielded my eyes from the sinking sun, and saw them. People. 6, slowly making their way up the hill. I shouted to them, "Hey, hello!" And then it found me. The feeling, something that, even if I search for my whole life, I'll never be able to find the right words to describe it. But, to simplify it, was a hunger. An urge to feed, stronger than any biological need I'd ever experienced. Starvation and thirst and lust combined and multiplied by 1,000. But I wasn't hungry. When I say there was hunger, it was something else that was hungry. I was the food. Food that was desperate to be consumed. I sprinted away from the road towards the people, climbed the hill. I didn't want to, but I also didn't not want to. I just did. It was like those times you would find yourself absent-mindedly staring into an open refrigerator, searching for a snack. I was completely on autopilot, driven by that hunger. I ran into the desert like a low-flying aircraft, banking around the trees and hurtling over bushes and rocks. I stumbled a few times, cutting my palms as I caught myself on the stones and gravel and short, bushy thorns. I then lunged forward like a sprinter right out of the blocks, racing to find that hunger. As I'm a relatively fit fellow, I quickly caught up to the stragglers climbing the hill, and I looked back as I passed them. A few seniors and a woman carrying a toddler. They were clearly working hard as they hurried into the desert. I heard them gasping for air as I passed, but their faces bore the expression of utter joy, just like mine. I crested the hill. The terrain gently descended on the other side, and that hunger, it laid in the plains at the base of the hill. It was a jagged gash in the desert's floor, an irregular black pit 20 meters wide. The remaining crowd from the highway was here, descending the hill and stumbling towards the abyss. They were spread out like the runners at the end of a long-distance race. The man in the lead ran full speed towards the pit and plunged in, not even breaking stride. Another man who was close behind fell in a second later, immediately vanishing into that dark abyss. The sight of those men falling into that horrid abyss, it filled me with joy and the need to join them. I had to satiate the hunger. I found new energy and sprinted down the hill towards the pit. More men and women fell in as I descended the hill. A man in a blue sweatshirt and red hat, a woman in a business suit with bare and bloody feet, 2 guys in blue overalls, and the sensation of that hunger, it started to change as I watched the men and women feed themselves to that black pit. The hunger wasn't satiated, or even diminished by the bodies that hurled themselves in. Yet, there was a feeling of, satisfaction. Like the first few bites of a feast, or the first breath upon surfacing from a long swim underwater. It's terrible to say now, but I remember thinking at that moment that horrific scene was so deeply beautiful, it nearly moved me to tears. The late afternoon sun painted the Kalahari in a golden glow. The group of people I had caught up to were strangers with nothing in common, save a journey on the N14. But at this lonely point in the desert, we were full of life and joy, and we were going to share the experience of death together. And then pain exploded into my left ankle. I fell again. This time I didn't lurch back into a sprint. The pain from the real world, not related to the otherworldly urges emanating from the pit. And I caught a glimpse of the sand-colored snake darting away into the grass as I rolled in the dust, clutching my leg. I examined my ankle and found 2 perfectly round holes in my leg. What the hell had bit me? A Cape Cobra? A puff adder? And that hunger vanished. Maybe it was the pain, or the terror of the snake bite, or whatever it was that chased it right out of my mind. Or maybe whatever was in the black pit decided I was now toxic, now that I had an ankle filled with snake venom. Even at that point, in the agony at the sight of a mass suicide, and facing death by snakebite, I could see the irony of my situation. I had been saved from this ravenous entity in the desert, only to go out by a damn snakebite. I had simply traded one form of death for another, but at least now I had my wits back, and I could at least try to fight for my life. The pain of it, though, it started to grow as the venom oozed into my lymph nodes and worked its way into the broken capillaries at the site of the bite. I carefully stood up, already feeling dizzy from the effects of the venom, and in the half-minute between me being bit and standing again, a half-dozen people had fallen into that lightless abyss. I shouted at the rest of them to stop. I screamed that they were going to die. I shouted for help. If anyone heard me, they didn't acknowledge it. They just kept running right into that hole. A kid in a purple school blazer, a man and a woman who might have been his parents, and then a man in a green and yellow t-shirt. I stared towards the hole again, not because of my urge to throw myself in, but to try to stop the remainder of people from giving themselves to whatever was down there. But the pain in my ankle was too severe, and the dizziness and the lightheadedness was intensifying, terrifyingly quickly. That snake bite was serious, and I really needed some medical help. I slowly lurched back up the hill, turning to shout back at the dwindling group of the still living every few steps. And then at the top of the hill, I turned back around, after shouting into the desert, and collided with a woman holding her toddler, the same ones I ran past a few minutes earlier. All three of us fell. The kid, a boy about 2, began screaming. The woman stood, ignored both her child and me, and simply continued forward towards that hunger. I rolled back, tackled her, grabbing her leg, screaming that she was going to die in that hole. But she simply sat up, grabbed a rock, and slammed it into the side of my head. I don't think I blacked out, but when the ringing stopped and my vision cleared, she was 50 meters down the hill. Blood was dripping onto my shirt. I made 3 attempts to stand, but the dizziness from the combined effect of the blow and the venom sent me crashing back into the dirt. I took a few deep breaths and tried again, finally managing to stay on my feet. And the boy, he just sat where he fell, screaming his little head off. I carefully walked to him and picked him up. Unexpectedly, his weight actually helped me deal with the dizziness. His extra 20 kilos of mass somehow stabilized me and slowed down my wobbling. When that hunger commanded me into the desert, it only took me a minute or two to cover the distance from the road to the hill. But the journey back, well, that took 15 minutes, at least. Thankfully, the kid only screamed. He didn't thrash about as I stumbled back to the highway. Between the wails, the kid screamed words, but they were words in Xhosa, or maybe Zulu? It's not a language I spoke. And then I had my first bit of truly good luck. You see, I'm not counting the snake bite, since that's a bit of a mixed bag of good and bad. But when I got back to the highway, thankfully my keys were still in my pocket, and they hadn't fallen out of my trail in the scrub. I dumped the kid on the passenger seat and started the buggy. I spun around and sped back towards Uppington. I don't know how I made it back alive. The drive was a nightmare. My vision was tumbling, and the dizziness made it impossible to focus. My head throbbed from the blow, and the kid screamed like he was being kidnapped, which I do suppose he was. I was swerving all over the highway. I could even recall regaining consciousness more than once, woken by the vibration and the noise of the wheels sliding off the road. But I didn't encounter any vehicles traveling the other way, which may have been a blessing, considering I probably would have just collided straight into them. I don't remember arriving in Uppington. They told me that someone saw me stop at a red light in town and slump over in the passenger seat. My buggy idled across the intersection and rolled to a stop sign. I woke in the hospital, dressed in a gown, IV in my arm, and my pulse monitor beeping beside me. A bandage on my leg and head. The doctors had a dozen or more questions. The SAPS officers had hundreds. And the SAPS didn't exactly believe me, but they didn't accuse me of anything either. I could tell from their questions that they knew something strange and awful had happened on the N14. and my story was one of the scant pieces of evidence they had to try to solve the puzzle. I spent hours answering the questions, fall asleep, really more of passing out, wake up, answer more questions, and fall asleep again. And that cycle went on for a long time. But nobody had an answer for me. What was in that pit? And what happened to the people that threw themselves in? So now I've made this video, because I need help. Does anybody have any idea what happened to me out there? Have you ever seen this sort of thing before? I need answers, please.